The recording light was red. Savrik knew what that meant. It meant the ship's main power was gone. It meant the engines were cold. It meant the 600 warriors who had boarded this vessel with him 6 months ago were either dead or drifting in the black in broken escape pods, hoping someone would find them before their air ran out. He pressed the button anyway. The light turned green. Emergency power still worked. Good. He did not have much time, but he had enough that he sat down in his command chair and looked into the lens of the recording device. His left arm was wrapped in torn cloth. The bleeding had slowed. His breathing was steady. A DRAVeth commander did not show weakness, not even at the end. Especially not at the end. This message is addressed to the High Council of the DRAVeth Dominion, he said. His voice was calm. He had decided it would be calm. My name is Savrik, Supreme Commander of the 4th Expansion Fleet. As of this recording, the 4th Fleet no longer exists. I'm the only senior officer still alive that I know of. What remains of my forces is scattered and unable to fight. He paused. He let that land. I want the Council to understand something before I continue. This was not a failure of preparation. It was not a failure of courage or of numbers. We had everything we needed to win. We had faster ships. We had stronger weapons. We had 3 times the fighters and 5 times the firepower of anything the enemy could put in the field. What happened at Redstone Station was not a military defeat in the normal sense. It was something else. Something I do not have a clean word for in our language. He shifted in the chair. His arm hurt. He ignored it. 6 months ago, the 4th Fleet arrived at the edge of the Redstone system. The target was a human colony. Small. 17,000 people, according to our intelligence. Miners, mostly. Some farmers. Engineers. A few administrators. No standing military force. No warships in orbit. The colony had 3 old defense platforms and a fence around the main settlement. Our analysts gave the operation 4 days. A generous estimate. Savrik looked at the wall for a moment. There was a long crack running through it from the last impact. Dust still hung in the air. I remember looking at the surface scans and feeling almost sorry for them. That was my first mistake. Not a tactical mistake. The first mistake was the feeling itself. In 40 years of warfare, I have learned that pity is a door. And if you open it, things come through that you did not invite. He turned back to the lens. When we entered the system, we sent the standard broadcast. Surrender your colony. Hand over resources and administrative control. Accept Dominion governance. In return, no lives will be taken. Standard terms. We have used those terms on 30 worlds. 29 of them accepted within 48 hours. A sound moved through the hull. Metals settling. The ship was cooling in the void, slowly bleeding heat into nothing. Savrik did not look toward the sound. He already knew every noise this dying ship made. He had been listening to them for 3 days. The humans of Redstone Station did not respond to the broadcast for 6 hours. When they finally responded, it was not a surrender. It was not a negotiation. It was a single sentence sent on an open channel so every ship in our fleet could hear it. He reached into the pocket of his uniform and pulled out a small printed transcript. He had kept it. He was not sure why. He held it up and read it out loud. The sentence was, "We know you are there. We are ready. Come down if you want." Savrik put the transcript back in his pocket. My second-in-command, Sub-Commander Reth, laughed when he heard it. Most of the bridge crew laughed. I did not laugh. I had fought in 40 campaigns. I had heard many things from enemies who were about to lose. Brave words, angry words, pleading words. But I had never heard an enemy sound quite like that. Calm, certain, as if they were not afraid of us. Not because they were foolish, but because they had already decided something, and our arrival had not changed that decision. He looked at his hands. 4 fingers on each. Gray-green skin. Old scars from old wars. Reth is dead now. He died in the 3rd week. He was a good officer. He deserved a better end than this. Savrik looked back at the lens. I have faced the Krellian swarms. I have broken the stone fleets of the Vorkai. I once held a siege for 2 years against the fortress cities of Dren and watched them fall. Nothing in 40 years of warfare prepared me for what I found on Redstone. I am recording this testimony because the Council must understand what is out there. Not to grieve what we lost, but to understand what we walked into, and why every fleet that follows US will walk into the same thing, unless someone listens. He settled back in the chair. So listen. The valley on Redstone was called the Red Flat by the colonists. Savrik had seen it in the survey scans before the landing. A wide, open stretch of ground between the colony's main gates and the tree line to the south. No cover, no structures, just flat red earth under a pale sky. His ground commander, Warlord Doss, had looked at it and said it was the best landing zone he had ever been given. Open ground meant clean sight lines. Clean sight lines meant easy kills. Doss was dead now, too. I want to describe the first ground assault, Savrik said into the lens. Not because I enjoy remembering it, but because it is important that the Council understand what those people did with 2 weeks and a set of mining tools. When the fleet had first arrived in orbit, there had been 2 weeks of positioning and negotiation attempts before Doss finally took his forces down. 2 weeks. At the time, Savrik had thought nothing of it. Let the humans have their time. Let them panic and argue and scramble. It would not change anything. The humans had not spent those 2 weeks panicking. Doss landed 3,000 ground soldiers on the Red Flat. Savrik continued. Elite warriors. Each of them had fought in at least 2 prior campaigns. They were not soft. They were not careless. They walked onto that open ground in standard formation and covered a quarter of the distance to the colony gate without a single shot fired at them. He stopped. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then the ground opened up. Not all at once. Not in one place. In 12 places spread across the formation, timed so that the soldiers in the center could not reach the edges before the edges had already fallen. Tunnels, dug by mining drills and shored up with supply crates and cut pipe. Tunnels with people at the bottom waiting with welded iron spikes and short-range fire tools. And when the soldiers who did not fall into the tunnels turned to run or turned to fight, the shaped charges buried under the approach path fired in sequence, left to right, cutting off retreat 800 soldiers in 40 minutes. Doss pulled back what he had left, Savrik said. He was shaken. I could hear it in his voice when he reported. He said the tunnels were hand-dug and rough. He said the weapons the humans used were not military grade. He said it looked like everything had been built by people who had never fought a war before. He let the silence sit for a moment. He was right. That was what made it so hard to understand. These were not trained soldiers who had planned a military defense. These were miners who had looked at their valley and thought like miners. They knew how rock broke. They knew how ground collapsed. They knew where a tunnel could run and where it could not. They used the knowledge they already had, and they pointed it at us. Savrik remembered watching the surveillance footage that evening in his command room. He had watched it 3 times, not because he needed to understand the tactics. He understood the tactics. He had watched it because of one small detail in the corner of the feed. A woman, older, short gray hair, moving through the smoke behind the colony gate with a data tablet in one hand, pointing left, then right, then left again. Not running, not crouching, just walking and pointing the way a site supervisor walks through a construction job. Her name, he would later learn, was Bera. She was the colony's chief engineer. She had designed the tunnel network. She had planned the charge sequence. She had been doing it while holding her regular job, managing water recycling systems for 17,000 people, because apparently that also still needed to get done while a fleet of warships sat in orbit above her home. I ordered an aerial strike the next morning, Savrik said. Full bombardment of the colony structures. If the people would not come out, we would remove the structures. He shook his head slowly. The structures were empty. They had moved everything underground before we ever entered orbit. The food stores, the medical equipment, the children, the animals even. There was nothing in those buildings. We bombed dust and empty walls. He rubbed his good hand across his face. And while we were bombing, the woman with the tablet was already planning the next thing. Nobody called for help. That was the part Savrik had spent the most time trying to understand. Even now, sitting alone in a dead ship with the stars outside and nothing but time to think, the humans of Redstone Station had not sent a distress call to any military authority. They had no military authority to call. They had no government that could dispatch a rescue fleet. They had no treaty that obligated anyone to come. They had sent a single open broadcast on the civilian long-range band, the kind of channel merchant ships used to report weather and route conditions. The broadcast said only, Redstone Station is under DRA-VETH attack. We are holding. Anyone in range, please be aware. Please be aware. That was not a cry for help, Savrik said. My communications officer told me it was a formality. A notice. The kind of thing you send so that passing ships know to reroute. He was not concerned. 3 weeks later, the first ship came out of the jump corridor at the edge of the system. It was not a warship. It was a salvage hauler, old and slow, its hull painted in the pale yellow of a private contractor out of the Breck Colony 3 systems away. It had no military markings. It had 2 crew. Its weapons were 2 short-range cutters welded to the forward hull, the kind used to split open derelict ships for scrap. The hauler's pilot was a young man named Davo. He was 24 years old. He had no weapons training. He had heard the broadcast while running a scrap route and had simply turned around and come. My fleet command flagged it as a curiosity, Savrik said. One small civilian ship. We assumed it had come to watch or had made a navigation error. We did not move to intercept immediately. That was a mistake. Davo flew his hauler directly at the nearest DRA-VETH frigate at full thrust and fired both cutters at the frigate's sensor array while broadcasting on the same open channel. Still here, Redstone. Coming in hot. Then he pulled hard and burned away before the frigate could get a targeting lock on him, damaged the frigate's forward sensors, and disappeared into the debris field on the system's outer ring. The frigate was not destroyed. It was barely scratched, but its captain spent the next 4 hours running damage reports instead of watching the jump corridor, which was when the second ship arrived. Then the third. They came from everywhere, Savrik said, and there was something in his voice now that he had not intended to be there. Merchant ships, mining vessels, a water transport, a passenger ferry that someone had bolted armor plates onto at some point in its life, a colony supply runner with no weapons at all that somehow managed to be useful just by sitting in inconvenient places and forcing our ships to track it. He looked at the lens. Within 2 weeks of that first broadcast, 41 civilian vessels had entered the Redstone system. Not one of them had been ordered to come. Not one of them was paid. Not one of them knew most of the others were coming. They each made the decision alone, in their own ships, and they all made the same decision. Savrik had pulled every piece of intelligence on human political structure that the Dominion archives held. He had read it himself. He knew the humans had no central government. He knew their colonies competed with each other. He knew they had long histories of conflict among themselves. He had specifically calculated that their lack of coordination would prevent any meaningful response to the attack. His calculation had been completely correct and completely useless. They did not coordinate, he said. That was what I could not fit into any model I had. In the Dominion, loyalty flows from contract or from blood. You fight for your employer or your family. You do not fight for strangers on a rock you have never visited. It would not occur to a DRA-VETH soldier to do such a thing. There would be no reason. He was quiet for a moment. These humans did not need a reason. Or rather, they all had the same reason, and it was the simplest one possible. Those are humans over there. These humans were in trouble. So you go. He thought of Davo, that young pilot who had flown a scrap hauler at a warship because a stranger sent a polite notice on a civilian channel. We found out later he survived, Savrik said. He was genuinely surprised. He told a reporter from the colony, after it was over, that he had not really expected to make it back. He said it as if that had not been relevant information when he decided to come. The shields on a DRA-VETH cruiser were designed to stop anything a standard enemy could fire at them. This was not arrogance. It was simply fact. The Dominion's energy shielding technology had been developed over 300 years and refined through dozens of wars. The system that powered it was complex and exact. It required specific components that had to be manufactured under controlled conditions. You could not build it from parts lying around. You could not reverse engineer it without the underlying theory, which had taken DRA-VETH scientists generations to work out. Savrik knew this. Every military commander in the Dominion knew this. It was one of the foundational certainties of their warfare. The shields held. Always. "I want to tell the council about the man named Gorsh," he said. Gorsh was a mechanic. Heavy-set, with short dark hair and hands that were burned on both sides from years of working near heat sources. He appeared in DRAVETH surveillance footage on the 14th day of the conflict, working outside one of the underground shelter entrances with a pile of components around him that made no sense. Some of the components were human mining equipment. Some of them were pieces of DRAVETH gear stripped from soldiers who had not come back from the tunnels. And Gorsh was connecting them. "My chief engineer watched the footage and laughed," Savrik said. He said the human was wasting his time. He listed 4 specific reasons why the components were not compatible. Different power frequencies, different connection architecture, different base materials. He said even if the man somehow got it to power on, it would produce nothing useful. Gorsh worked for 31 hours without stopping except to eat, which he did with one hand while the other hand kept working. He slept for 4 hours on the ground next to his project. Then he worked for another 20 hours on the 3rd day. He tested the device that IT did not work perfectly. The first test blew out 2 of the components and sent Gorsh sliding back 10 feet across the ground. He got up, looked at what had broken, went back to his parts pile, and started modifying that on the 4th day. He tested it again. "It worked," Savrik said. The words were simple. The weight behind them was not. "I do not mean it worked a little. I mean it punched through the forward shield of one of my destroyers as if the shield was not there and took out the engine block. The destroyer went dark. It did not explode. It just stopped." His engineers had run the analysis 3 times, certain there was an error. There was no error. The device Gorsh had built operated on a frequency that fell between the calibrated ranges of the shield system. Not above it, not below it, between them. A gap so narrow that no DRAVETH engineer had ever thought to close it, because no DRAVETH engineer had ever thought anyone could find it without the foundational theory. Gorsh had not found it through theory. He had found it because he was a mechanic who had spent his life figuring out how to make things work that were not supposed to work together. And he had simply tried combinations until something happened. "We adjusted the shields," Savrik said. "It took 4 days. On the 5th day, his device did not work anymore." He paused. On the 6th day, he had a new version. Savrik rubbed his eyes. The emergency lights were dimmer now. The power was slowly fading. "We adjusted again. He built again. Every time we closed the gap he found a different gap. Not because he fully understood the theory. I am still not certain he did. He did it because he was stubborn and practical, and he did not accept that something was impossible just because no one had done it before. My engineers were working from knowledge. He was working from curiosity. And curiosity, I have learned, does not run out the way knowledge does." The second cruiser went dark on day 19. Gorsh was eating when it happened. Surveillance footage showed him watching the cruiser lose power, nodding once to himself, and then going back to his food. The prisoners were the thing that broke his army, not the tunnels. Not the improvised weapons. Not the 41 civilian ships that had turned a simple orbital blockade into a constant headache of small engagements. Those things had hurt the 4th Fleet. They had bled it and confused it and cost it more than Savrik had ever expected to pay. But the prisoners were the thing that broke something deeper. On the 22nd day, Savrik said, a raiding party of 14 soldiers was cut off during a tunnel collapse in the eastern grid. They were captured by the colonists. All 14 were alive and mostly uninjured. Captured, not killed. Under DRAVETH law, prisoners taken in combat were the property of the capturing force. They could be used for labor, used for exchange, or executed at the captor's discretion. It was not cruelty. It was simply how things worked. Every species the Dominion had ever encountered understood this. It was a universal language. The humans of Redstone Station did not speak it. They put our soldiers in a storage room, Savrik said. A clean one, with bedding on the floor. They treated the injuries. They brought food 3 times a day. Hot food. He paused on those 2 words for a moment. Hot food. The colony was under bombardment. Their people were living underground. They were rationing supplies. And they were making hot food for 14 enemy soldiers who had come there to take their home. His intelligence officer had reported it with visible confusion, the secondary set of eyes on his face blinking rapidly the way they did when he encountered something that did not fit any category. Savrik had assumed it was a tactic. Psychological manipulation. Soften the prisoners, extract information, use them as public relations material for some broadcast. He had sent orders to the returning prisoners after the exchange to report everything the humans had said and done in detail. The report came back 3 days later. The humans had said very little. Bera herself had visited the storage room on the second day. She had sat on a crate across from the senior soldier, a sub-officer named Hrek, and asked him about his family. Not his unit, not his orders, his family. When Hrek, baffled, had told her he had a mate and 2 young at home, she had nodded and said that she hoped they would see him again soon. Then she had left. Nobody had asked the prisoners for information. Nobody had threatened them. Nobody had even been particularly unfriendly. Hrek came back changed, Savrik said. I could see it in the debrief footage. He sat there answering my intelligence officer's questions, and every few moments he would stop and look at nothing for a second, like a man trying to solve a problem he could not name. He was not traumatized. He was not broken. He was confused in a way that went very deep. The story spread through the fleet the way cold spreads in a sealed room. Slow at first, then everywhere. Then Bera did the other thing. She found a damaged DRAVF communicator in the wreckage of a fallen drone and had it repaired well enough to broadcast on Dominion military frequencies. She had apparently taught herself enough of the DRAVF language to be understood, though the accent was difficult. She broadcast for 11 minutes on an open channel. She said that Redstone Station had no wish to be anyone's enemy. She said that the soldiers who had been held were safe and would be returned in good condition. She said that any soldier who was tired of fighting was welcome to come down to the surface, unarmed, and wait out the war in the colony's care. She said they would be fed and housed and would not be harmed. She said, please. I sat in my chair for a long time after that broadcast, Savrik said quietly. I gave no orders for almost an hour. My officers did not interrupt me. I think they were also sitting quietly somewhere. He looked at his hands again. One of my sub-commanders came to me that evening and requested a reassignment. He said he could no longer perform effectively against this enemy. When I asked why, he thought about it for a while and then said, I cannot properly hate them. I did not know what to do with that. Savrik had denied the reassignment. The sub-commander had died the following week in a Western Grid engagement, fighting as well as he ever had. But his words had stayed. You cannot train a soldier to fight something that feeds him when he falls, Savrik said. It is not in any manual. It is not in any preparation. We were ready for an enemy. We had not prepared for this. The power was almost gone. The recording light had dimmed from green to a pale, faint flicker. Savrik could see his breath now in the cold air of the command room. He did not have long. He sat straight in his chair and kept his voice level. He had one thing left to say, and he wanted to say it correctly. I want to be clear about something, he said. The humans did not win because they are stronger than us. They are not. Not yet. They lost more people than we did in the ground engagements. Their ships were older and slower. Their weapons, until Gorsh and the others started building new ones, were far below our standard. In a simple, clean war fought on equal ground, we would have won. He let that sit. But there is no such thing as a simple, clean war with humans. I know that now. I did not know it when I came here. He had spent 3 days alone on this ship, going over everything, looking for the moment where it could have gone differently. He had found it easily. The moment was before the fleet ever left Dominion space. The moment was when someone decided that humans were a manageable target. That was the mistake. Not the tactics. Not the deployment. The assumption. Here is what I know about humans, Savrik said. I want the Council to hear this slowly and not dismiss it. They do not accept defeat as a fact. Other species, when they lose enough, update their understanding of what is possible and stop. Humans do not update that way. They find another angle. They find another gorge. They dig another tunnel. It is not stubbornness exactly. It is something more fundamental. They do not seem to believe that losing a battle means losing. They treat every loss as information and keep going. They help strangers. This is not a small thing. This is a civilization-level trait that changes every calculation. You cannot plan for 41 civilian ships that came because they wanted to. You cannot model it. It does not fit any strategic framework we have. They adapt faster than anything I have ever encountered. Not because they are smarter, because they are willing to try things that should not work and find out later why they did. Gorsh did not know the theory behind what he built. He did not need to. He just kept building until something happened. And they do not hate. He stopped on that point. This is the one that I keep returning to. Every species I have ever fought has hated us. Fear turns to hate. That is normal. That is how it works. Hate makes enemies predictable. A hating enemy wants to hurt you, and wanting to hurt you is a limitation. It makes them take risks. It makes them make mistakes. The humans of Redstone Station never seem to hate us. Bera, the woman with the tablet, the woman who designed the tunnels and fed our prisoners hot meals, never in any surveillance footage showed hatred. Anger, yes. Grief when they lost people, but not hatred. She kept the door open. Even with our fleet in orbit above her home and her people dying in the tunnels, she kept the door open. An enemy who hates you is trying to destroy you. An enemy who does not hate you is trying to outlast you. Outlasting is far more dangerous. The recording light flickered badly now. Savrik could see the edges of the image going dark. 17,000 people on one small colony held off the Fourth Fleet for 6 months. Not soldiers, miners and engineers, and one tired woman with a tablet and too much to do. Think about what happens when humans are not 17,000 people on one small colony. Think about what happens when there are 1 billion people spread across 100 worlds, with 100 years of exactly this kind of experience behind them. They're not there yet. I want to be honest about that. Today, a larger fleet with better preparation might win. Might, but every war you fight with them teaches them. Every loss they take makes them better. Every closed door makes them look for a window. They do not stop learning. They do not stop coming. And they do not stop leaving the door open for you when they win, which somehow makes the whole thing worse. The light was nearly gone. Savrik adjusted his uniform. He sat straight. He looked into the lens one last time with the eyes of a commander who had conquered 30 worlds and lost one and understood now exactly what that meant. My recommendation to the Council is simple. Do not go to war with humanity. Not today. Not in 10 years. Not for territory, and not for resources, and not to make a point. Leave Redstone Station alone. Leave all of them alone. Not because you cannot beat them today, but because every time you try, you make them into something harder to beat tomorrow. I came here expecting a colony. I found something that does not have a name in our language. The closest word we have is fire. But fire goes out. What I found on Redstone does not go out. Do not give them a reason. The light went out. The recording ended. 3 years later, a DRAVeth salvage crew found the drifting ship and pulled the data core. The recording was reviewed by the Council in a closed session. The minutes of that session were never made public. Redstone Station, by that time, had doubled in population. The tunnels Bera had designed were now permanent infrastructure, lit and clean, used daily by 17,000 people who had become 34,000. Davos still flew salvage routes. Gorsh had opened a small workshop near the south gate and was teaching apprentices. 47 former Daraveth soldiers still lived in the colony, most of them working in the mines or the repair yards, most of them having never gone home. Nobody had asked them to stay. Nobody had asked them to leave. The door had just stayed open the way it always did, and some of them had walked through it.